So now we can go into some of the fun stuff. So yeah, and so we're gonna bring up our legal beagles.
In a testament to Craig's brilliance, with all due respect to Bob and Derek, we're starting at the very bottom here. You're getting the most boring legal law that you can have, so it can only get better from here. Any of you that have ever served on a jury in a criminal case, if you've ever heard the jury instructions, they tell you there are a list of do's and don'ts. Legal tells you all the don'ts. There are no do's. It is don't. So I'm going to apologize ahead, but there are constraints. You need to be aware of it. Chris and I can talk forever. Ask us questions. If something doesn't sound right, if you're like, ooh, I don't know about that, let us know. The way this is going to sort of roll is, if you've ever watched sports, you've kind of got your play-by-play caller, you've got your color commentary. Chris is going to be our play-by-play guy. Bob's a good example down in Santa Cruz. He's not the elected, but he's the one that really runs the civil shop. This is what Chris has done in Pinal County for 12 years. Then he was at Maricopa County before that. Shoot, he was in Ohio before even that. The day-to-day, very legal questions, in my opinion, should always be going to your head civil attorney. I, as the elected, tend to have a bigger view. I'm looking at the political implications. I'm looking at, hey, if you do this, this is potentially the outcome or the unintended consequences. What I would suggest to each and every one of you, every county is going to run different. Make sure you have that conversation with your county attorney. Ask them, are you giving me legal advice, pure legal advice, or are you counseling me? Because as attorneys, we are attorneys and counselors at law, and we provide both. And you need to know what you're getting from your county attorney, because sometimes those two can sort of, especially in a smaller community where you wear tons of hats, it can really sort of meld. I think Chris and I historically have done a pretty good job where he's going to give you the cold, hard answer, and then it becomes my job to sort of massage it and figure out how we can implement it. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and you're just going to hear me jumping in and out because truly he's the expert in this field.
What Ken is trying to say is, I've been doing this, way too long. Craig said, 20, he's been at this 20 years. I've been in county government 30 years now. This is going to be my 31st year. I did 18 years in Maricopa County as chief civil deputy and coming up through the ranks, and the last 12 now down in Pinal County and that. Ken's right. I tried not to look at it from a political standpoint. I look at it from the legal standpoint. I try to be aware that there may be a political component, but I can't play favorites with board members. They're all the client. When that board sits as one, they're the client. And what Madam Chair was saying earlier, that they're handcuffed sometimes and there's a lot of dues. Yeah, I'm the one that usually has to say, you can't really do that.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
That sigh you hear, that you'll hear a lot of that when you're legal.
But Supervisor Miller, one of my clients, what I would tell him a lot of times is, yeah, but let me see if I can torture the statute to get you there. And that's one of my terms. I always, we'll try to torture a little bit. It may not be absolutely clear, and there may be some risk involved. And our job is just to advise you of that risk and make you available to make that best decision that you can for your district, your county, whatever it may be.
So we'll take the time and say, come on, Chris, torture the statute for me this time. I need a little help. The other thing, they were a great team because he had to give us the straight black and white answer. But Kent would be in the room and he'd go, yeah, but. And that, because it could go this direction, or it could go that direction. And was a great partnership. And I had a great advantage to having these two guys sitting as our legal counsel.
All right, with that, I think we'll try to keep this moving. We're going to take it from a very high level. Feel free to ask questions at any time. We may not have the answer. We may say, well, maybe.
Yeah, it's a very technical answer.
It's Latin. Maybe. Yeah, it's one of those legal Latin terms. Now, Craig, let's see, which way do I go with this? Which one is it? The top one?
No, just go ahead. Hit this guy.
Oh, okay. All right. We're going through. This is the areas we're going to be talking about today. Let's just start. And Craig has brought this up already. That the counties are creatures of the state, and we're what's called, and this is a separate political subdivision. You're going to hear that a lot. Cities are separate political subdivisions. Water districts are separate political subdivisions, which means they have certain authorities and certain rules that are derived from statute that comes down that they can go ahead and utilize. Counties, as Craig has also said, they're created by the legislature for exercising those certain overreaching powers that really are for the whole county. It'd be really tough to have jails in every city. It'd be tough to have, fire stations and stuff like that. Cities are well equipped to do that. A large county, it's really impossible to get out there. That's why you have fire districts to try to compromise it and help fill that gap, if you will. Okay, this is one of the things that I think is really key for a board of supervisors newly elected to remember, is that a board of supervisors only has those specific powers has been expressly provided by the legislature, or it can be necessarily implied. But that necessarily implied is not a gateway to doing whatever you may want. It has to be linked to that prior power that you did have as given to you by the legislature.
I promise each of you are gonna get calls from your constituents, and they're gonna say, we've got this issue. And you're gonna hear it and you're gonna say, that is an issue, like we need to fix that. You're not gonna have the authority to do that. What you need to do is you need to walk over to Mr. Borelli and say, he needs to fix that. And that's a really delicate conversation you have to have, not you literally, the legislature. But because there's only so much authority you have. And the reality is your constituents, the voters, the people who live in your community, the people that you're serving, they don't appreciate those limitations. So it becomes very important on how you're going to message that to the people so they don't revolt, so they don't get angry with you, so they don't yell at you, so they don't get on social media and just blast you, because you literally can't fix all of their problems. It seems like you should be able to. I will tell you from your very core, you will want to. You'll say, yeah, this is stupid. We should be able to fix this. But because of the way we are created, we only have certain authority. And if you exceed that authority, that's when you get in trouble. That's when lawsuits come. That's when things get really, really bad. So just your favorite excuse needs to be talk with the legislature. And I would tell you, each of you, I would highly recommend that you get to know the various legislators that are in your district. Because what you don't want is them to always be mad at you because you keep throwing them under the bus. Instead, it needs to be a dialogue that you have with them.
Is there a question?
Yeah, to that point, okay, but you go to your legislator, you try to get it done, then ACO and CSA kill it.
I'm not going to deny that happens.
And also a little caveat on that is, not just legislature, but your cities and towns also. And you're going to have to develop some good partnerships with them, because their people are also going to be coming to you, expecting you to fix those problems. And it may be a city problem, not a county problem, but you need to be aware that you will get those calls. Okay, like we were saying, whether the authority exists, and this is from a case, you have to approach whether you have that authority in the affirmative. And that means, what specific constitutional or what specific statutory authority can you rely upon to do what you want to do? And there are a set, and well, we'll take this for first. I hear this a lot from, well, it doesn't say I can't do it, so I have to be able to do it. That's a false premise. You can't rely upon the fact that the statute or the laws don't even address this area that you want to address. And you think it's, just vacant. So you should be able to, the county should be able to go in there and do what they want to do. You can't address it like that, because if you don't have a specific statutory authority, you're going to get challenged and you're going to get overturned. And you always ask, well, who's going to challenge? Who's going to do that? This is good for the community. Well, your Goldwater Institute, your taxpayer association groups are going to say, oh, you don't have the authority to issue that kind of tax. There's other groups out there that will bring those challenges and say, you don't have that specific statutory authority and you're operating outside of it. So it's unconstitutional and it should be canceled. It should be voted, vetoed down. The tax needs to be repealed, whatever. You're going to find that happens. And just because you think this is really good and no one's going to challenge that, why would they? don't be surprised.
It only takes one.
Yeah.
In your county, it only takes one, and I think if each of you think about it, you know who that one in your community may be. So it only takes one to challenge.
Okay, we talked about, the powers of the county, and there's a specific general power that the county has. And this, to some extent, gives you control over your other elected officials in the county. The Board of Supervisors has a specific power to sue and be sued. It has the power to purchase lands and hold lands. It has the power to contract. This is a big one, because you'll find out that other elected officials, sheriffs, for example, they love to try to go ahead and buy stuff on their own. I've seen it over the years. They like to try to do things, and they want to enter into contracts themselves. They don't have the authority to sign a contract. Sheriff, only the Board of Supervisors has the authority to enter into contracts. Now, you also have the power to control their budget, and set how much money they have. And you have certain things that you obviously want to work with them on because you want to achieve the same goals, but they don't have the power to sign a contract. I can remember when Kent came in the office, he wanted to sign stuff. I said, you don't have that
I
authority.
still want to.
And we have to explain it that that's a Board of Supervisors authority to execute contracts, to bind the county, to essentially, to bind the fisc, if you will, because they're the ones paying for it. Yes.
The power of the purse that the counties have. We don't have line item authority. We can't say, we're not gonna support this particular aspect of your budget. It's just the overall budget. Is that correct?
Yes, but.
We have a series of slides. You're teeing this up very well for us. You just threw us an underhand softball pitch. 'Cause that's gonna lead into this
A
conversation.
short answer is, you could. There's nothing to prohibit you from doing line item budgets. And there's even a case that talks about, and it's a case deal with Maricopa County where the sheriff was getting into all, Sheriff Arpaio, was getting into all kinds of lawsuits and costing the county a lot of money. And, during a fiscal downturn, they wanted to put certain budgetary constraints on them, saying, well, we're giving you money for more detentions officers, but you're using it over here. And the only way they could control that, and they didn't do it, but they could have, we're gonna put you on a line item budget. That takes a lot of supervision, a lot of, department resources, from your finance department to be able to do that. And it's a really tough thing to manage.
So it's a little more like an earmark budget than it is. So you earmark all the things you want and you don't earmark the money for the things you don't want.
So Paul, I can give you an example that I saw one time used, and that was, they did not want a particular employee in a particular office. So my board actually just didn't give them money for that person's exact salary. So that was a way that the board was very clear, this is not somebody, so they wanted an attorney that worked specifically for a particular supervisor. And he wanted like $135,000. So they're like, yeah, we'll take your budget minus $135,000. It's not exactly a line item, but the board was very clear. The message got across it and it ended up resolving that particular issue. So there are sort of ways that you can wink, wink, nod, nod, get your message across without going to the very specific line item. But it was very evident what everybody wanted, and it was clear that everybody was unanimous, and it got to that point. So,
But you have to wait a year. If depending on where you are in the cycle
So-
to make that happen.
yeah, but budget season's coming up now for y'all.
Yeah.
So because you're not on the calendar year, you're on the fiscal year.
Yes.
I know, I think in February is when our county starts actually getting financial stuff. I think I saw a question.
What do? You're saying that the board of supervisors have oversee of contracts. What if a foundation decides to give, say someone like the sheriff, a whole bunch of money to do something? Is that supposed to come to the board of supervisors?
Yes.
You have to accept it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that you personally have to review everything. I mean, what ends up happening is your team should be presenting it, saying, hey, this is a contract. Like if I wanted a contract, I'm the one that's negotiating it. I'm the one trying to enter in to essentially set the terms, but I'm going to the board for final authority on it. You're looped in the whole time. Our county managers would be looped in the whole time. You would be briefed at a really high level, but it's not like every single contract you're going to be reading.
So a gift or somebody says, hey, I want $13 million to go build a specific building for the sheriff's department. Can that be done without it going through the board?
No, you have to approve it because even though there's a $13 million building or gift that they're giving you, there's maintenance that's ongoing with it. There are all these other unintended and maybe unthought of costs that burden the county, or maybe it's not something that the county is supportive of, or they don't want it. So the board has to approve that. The board has to say this is okay.
But, and think about it also in practical terms. I doubt a lot of counties are gonna have the ability or want to write a $13 million check. They're gonna bond for that. They're gonna go out and get financing for that because they wanna stretch that over and not take that hit all in one year. They wanna have it over many years. That's the board who's gonna have to go ahead and work with bond counsel to get that and put it out to the public and get a vote on that, or go ahead and issue those bonds. Again, that's a contract. And that's what the board has authority to approve. And it comes down to that, that last bullet point on there, determine the budgets of elected county officials. That's the easiest way that you have control is the budgetary power.
Can I ask a question about that, please?
Yeah, right.
And it's following up on Supervisor David's point. I understand that there's a case law where a row officer can say, in order to fulfill my statutory responsibilities for the operation of my department, I needed to exceed the budget that the Board of Supervisors set. So can you address that?
Yes, I mean, the bottom line is there are certain, particularly public safety issues. So you can see that, you may see it with, for example, your sheriff's department. If they have people in the jail, they have other statutory obligations, they have to do it. There could be extradition costs. There could be, for example, public defense was mentioned earlier by Craig. We have to pay the public defenders, we have to pay contract counsel. So there are certain times that your ability is real, it's not absolute to limit that budget. And there are certain times when we can exceed our budget and there's nothing we can really do. You can do to stop. And I say we as a row officer, whether it's a county attorney, a sheriff, or something else. Again, if it's being done routinely, then they're exceeding the scope of your authority. There could be litigation, but there's a really, really good reason it can happen. And it does happen. It's pretty rare, but it does.
And it's gotta be really kind of those mandated duties that they have to perform. Think of one of the, someone's in the jail and they have, a huge medical condition. The jail has to treat that person and it could go over your budget when they have to do those types of things at times. And so there have to be those budget adjustments. But that's where working with that row officer, if you will, trying to figure out what those are and having enough cushion, if that's what you can do, to be able to anticipate some of those expenses. Now, the part that, on the flip side of that, so what happens at the end of the year when they have excess money left? You're coming to, May and they got money left in their budget and they want to write checks, they want to buy stuff, Again, that comes up to you to go ahead and supervise, administer, and put policies and procedures in place on how that's going to work. Let me go back to the slides. We talked about county powers, and the one power, the biggest power you have is under 11-251, which is like 4 or 5 pages long in the statute books. And it lists 62 specific powers that the legislature has given the Board of Supervisors over the years. Every now and then we'll add another one. We just did something for water related, Craig, I think that 2 years ago. Yeah, that we've got in there, but it's really hard to get additional powers granted by the legislature to the Board of Supervisors. So it's those essential 62 powers. We're not going to go through all of those. We'll pick a few of those out just so you have an idea of what that is. Examples of powers, and we've been touching upon this a little bit. The board's ability, they can refuse to fund appropriate activities, or forcibly they can use its powers to withhold approval for capital expenditures, salary increases, and the like. And that was going to the question that Paul was asking. What can they do with a line item budget? It's in that case that the court even went on to say, you could create a line item budget if you wanted to do that on the sheriff to make sure that they stay within that power. Maricopa didn't do that, didn't go that far, but the court said you had the authority to do that.
So let me jump in. This should be kind of the red flag that's going off. The statute, the very first, the 251 is where your statutory authority is found. A1, it's literally the very first thing you read. Supervise. It ain't supervised like you think. That's the reality. That is a term of art. This is a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo, but you don't have the ability to direct the office. And that's a fight, that trust me, you all don't want to have because you'll lose. There have been fights. A lot of these case laws were supervisors saying, hey, we're responsible. It says supervise. Like my statutory responsibility, my moral responsibility is to supervise. And you know what? My assessor's a moron and I need to come in and fix this. You don't have the authority to do that. That supervision is very limited. That is whether the money's being used appropriately. Now, if they vacate office, that's a little bit different. But to come in day to day and say, you shall hire Joe, you shall fire Jill, or anything along those lines, you cannot do that. You would be exceeding your legal bounds. And there is, again, case law after case law where this keeps getting whittled down. Quite frankly, at some point, I think that word supervise should probably be changed at the state legislature because it's misleading, particularly to new supervisors that haven't been smacked upside the head yet. He brought me in because I'm colorful. Okay.
He doesn't have to report to anybody anymore. I still do. And I know what stays in here may not stay in here. So here are some of the, just a few of the high level powers that you do have that's laid out in that 11-251 section of the Arizona revised statutes. What you would think of: roads, levy taxes, fill legislative vacancies, this is an old one. You regulate bathhouses, that we really don't do a whole lot of that anymore. Acquire land for roads, drainage ways, employee benefits, salaries, band pools, healthcare, all that comes under the employee benefits, license and lease and sell property. There are even specific ways that you have to go through statute to dispose of a property or to buy a property. If you have county property, we got excess property. Let's make some money and fill the tax hole by selling this. Well, you just can't go pick someone to sell it. You gotta be appraised. You can only be at 90%. There's statutory provisions that you have to go through, and that's really where hopefully you're working with your legal team to do that, and you haven't got too far ahead. And well, I've already told them we're going to be able to sell it to them. Wait a second, maybe not. I mean, I can remember in Maricopa County, we had a landfill that they wanted to get out of the landfill business and wanted to sell it. Well, there's really only two people out there that are buying those things: Waste Management and Republic. We're the only two people that you're gonna get to buy a landfill. So you know who your competition is. So, but we had to do a solicitation out there and try to put a few little ornaments on that tree. Well, we want to sell this, but it's got to be used for a landfill purpose. It's got to be able to be, disposed of in the next number of years. It's got to be closed down. It can only be so tall, those type of things. So we put kind of, ornaments on that tree, but we knew there was only going to be two people that are going to bid on it. So there are ways to kind of structure those things with work with your legal departments on how you can get there. Rich,
what about an IGA with your city? A city, sorry.
Again, that comes to the Board of Supervisors, and you have to be able to have joint powers on a lot of those type of things. Yeah, you just can't IGA with a city to do something that you can't really do yourself.
So let me give you a good example, Rich. An IGA that we use for the city of Maricopa. My office does diversion. As the prosecutor, we had a diversion program. The city didn't have that ability. I wanted to enter into a diversion program. I wanted to use a pilot with the city of Maricopa. So of course I negotiate with their city attorney. I speak with their city judge, city council's all on board, and we enter into an IGA. But getting back to his early point, I couldn't sign it. Then I had to take it to the Board of Supervisors, where we came to them and said, hey, this is all good. It was a formality, but they had to end up signing it. But because we provide that service already and we wanted to provide it, we absolutely could. But even I, as a row officer, didn't have the authority to do it all on my own. I had to go get my board's permission ultimately to accomplish that.
Okay, I'm looking on there, fill vacancies in legislative and county offices. So let's say, county superintendent of schools vacates the position. How does that get filled by the supervisors?
So there's a statutory process, but ultimately, the position needs to be filled by the party that vacated it. So I know you're a Republican, Sonny. So we'll say that there was Republican. There will be nominees that come to you. You then would vet the nominees, and then you as a board would choose who you ultimately want.
Same thing with legislative process.
Correct.
Yeah, and there's other little nuances that the board can do when it gets to that point, you know, do they want to interview everybody? Do they just want to interview the top three? Do they want to appoint a standing committee? Because if you have all board members, you have an open meeting, so you have to schedule that.
Yeah, on the, filling the vacancy, I'm not clear about if you're an independent. Because I don't know if that's really an official political party, but if you're an independent and you vacate, then what is the process?
So it depends if you're, I think, actually independent or a party
But
not
not
designated. A party not designated is actually different. So there is an independent party, it's just very, very small.
Right.
Most in Arizona are party not designated. I'm gonna have to get back to you because we've never ran into that issue. I just, it's statute. I mean, statute would tell you, so there is a clear answer. Just as I stand here before you, frankly, I'm not sure. The other thing that I would tell you that you're not required to do, but I would highly, highly, highly encourage each and every one of you, if you're filling those, pay the money and do a fairly in-depth background check.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you're the ones that are essentially giving them your blessing. And if they end up being a crook, they end up being a problem, an idiot, or whatever, a criminal, that's on you. Now, just because somebody's committed a crime doesn't mean they're not appropriate, but it's probably something you should be aware of. And then you have the opportunity in exec session to ask them about that if you so choose. Like, hey, I saw 20 years ago, you were convicted for a felony. Why should I put you forward? And they may have a very good reason. You know, I was a dumb kid, whatever the answer is. But there's no statutory requirement that you do a background check. I'm begging you for your sake, do it.
It's worth a little bit of dollars to pay to get that done.
Chris, isn't there a trigger to the amount of months left to serve that could trigger another election?
A re-election, yes.
Re-election.
So yes, it's quite possible. If somebody, if your example, if they vacate within the first about 14 months of their term, and it's a 4-year term, then you would actually only appoint the interim, and there would have to be an election on the next regularly scheduled general election. So it would go into gubernatorial.
So if the statute doesn't say you need to do a background check, then if you do background check, will they get back at you?
No,
No, you're allowed to do it because when Chris was talking earlier about those things that are read into sort of necessary, again, because you're picking this person, it's necessary that you get a reasonable amount of information. So you're protected because that's within the scope of your authority. And we don't really talk about that too much in this presentation, but you're generally protected personally if you're acting within the scope of your authority. If you are acting in furtherance of your responsibility, you're going to be protected, but you start doing crazy stuff on the side, your standing as an elected doesn't protect you, and Chris and I don't get to represent you. But that is squarely within your job of making that appointment. So you saying, hey, I need more information to make the best decision, that's where we can certainly say that's read into the statute.
the perfect example of that, you have the statutory authority to go ahead and fill vacancies. It doesn't say how you have to fill vacancies, other than, you know, what part of the term they're in, you know, that process. But it's up to you. If you want to have a committee of one, if you want to have, you know, everybody on the board interview, if you want to do background checks, that's the necessarily implied, because you do have the specific authority to fill vacancies. Right? Moving
I
on.
love the questions. We're gonna have to move kind of quick though,
Yeah.
because I see Craig, he's like beating his.
I know, you're great.
Yeah.
I mean, I can talk fast, but I don't think we're gonna go much faster. Let's see, here are just some additional authorities that you may know about, but you don't think about all the time, that the Board of Supervisors has. Fee for services, you know, you're gonna provide services to the community, you're gonna charge a fee. You just can't pick that out of the air. There are certain statutory provisions you have to go through before you can get there. Procurement procedures. I love this, you know, new Board of Supervisors come in, they want to remodel their office, they want to do stuff, you know, and they just, you know, well, I got a P card, I'm just gonna go buy stuff. Well, you can't necessarily go do that. You have to go through the procurement process to do that. You know, well, my uncle, you know, gonna give me a great deal on this stuff. He doesn't need it anymore. Yeah, no. So, animal control, public health, emergency management. You know, emergency management is probably another thing that's gonna be big this year with potential wildfires again. It is every year. All right. We've been talking about, you know, the board's authority to adopt ordinances and, you know, That's another way you can go ahead and get some rules out there. It's like adopting policy that you want your staff or your public to follow. Ordinances, maybe zoning codes and the like of how you're gonna go ahead and build certain things. And you can provide punishments by fine. You have to be real careful when you start charging too much for something, because you can only, as a board, recoup your costs. You can't make money on the service you're providing. You really have, but there's ways to build into a little bit of that. I mean, you gotta have maintenance, you gotta have training, you gotta have other things, so you gotta have a little bit of extra on there, but you can't say, well, we're gonna charge $100 for this inspection, when really it only takes 2 minutes online. For someone that the cost would come out to maybe $25. You may be pushing the envelope on those type of things. Let's see, may apply to incorporated, unincorporated, yep. Some of the things can apply to both.
This is kind of where Craig was talking, that the reality is you become effectively the city government for your unincorporated counties or your unincorporated constituents. One thing that we would see, and I'm sure some of you have dealt with it, is like a noise ordinance, for example. We have this lady who likes to literally polish rocks. Like she goes out, finds them, and then we'll grind them at like 5 o'clock in the morning in her subdivision. We didn't have an ordinance saying you couldn't do it. So essentially there was no city ordinance because they lived in a unincorporated part of the county. So that is something that the board could say, hey, this is an issue, we can actually fix it. So that's one of the areas you can for that unincorporated. And then you would have to say, what is the punishment? Right. So again, there's all kinds of costs. You've got legal costs, you've got law enforcement costs and all those type of things. Now you can't make it $10,000 or $50,000 or $100,000, but you can make it enough that you recoup your costs and it also dissuades people. But that's something that the board as a whole has to decide. And I'll tell you, it's not as easy as just saying, we need to add this. There's a huge process because it's governed by state law. You have to publish it to the public. There's all of these nightmares. So when you're making those, typically it's not a one-off. We usually try and gather a handful of changes that all need to occur because the process is very cumbersome. But that's an area where the county is going to adopt very specific rules or regulations or ordinances to make everybody kind of live a better, happier coexistence in life.
And the one caveat there, those ordinances you adopt, can't conflict or be inconsistent with state law. The example that I like to use is years ago, I think it was Cochise County, or maybe it was the city of Bisbee, I can't remember which, wanted to adopt an ordinance on no plastic bags. And they adopted this ordinance, but state law said, no. There's statewide implications on how that's gonna affect everybody else out there. So state law said you couldn't do that. So that's just one example that I like to use. And that was years ago, but still, I think it's still impactful.
Chris?
Yes.
Could a individual store do it?
Yes.
And so the city would have no say in the matter and no.
Just like the store can go ahead and charge you a nickel for you in a bag or whatever it may be. Yeah. Bring your own. Yeah.
You're showing your age. Nobody charges a nickel for anything anymore. Chris.
Everyone buys online now. Let's see. Ministerial obligations. This is gonna be one thing that you get questions on, and usually comes up when you're setting the tax rate. You set the tax rate, and you're also setting a tax rate for school districts, for flood control districts, for water districts, and everything else out there. You're not actually setting that. You're directing that the treasurer put that on the tax bill, but that's a ministerial act that you are performing. Because other jurisdictions, whether it's a water district, whether it's a school board, whatever it is, those boards made the decision to go ahead and determine what that tax is going to be. You're just ministerially now putting it on the rolls so that they can get it collected. But you'll get a call. Why are you taxing me for this? And routinely, the boards have had to say, council, would you please explain, what our role is in, these taxes that we are now approving? So we would try to provide that cover.
So ministerial literally means you have no discretion. Right. You are a rubber stamp, nothing more. So anytime you ever see that language ministerial, zero discretion, you're a rubber stamp. It is frustrating. It'll be frustrating to you, I promise you. It happens in not just tax, but there are other times that it comes up and you're like, wait a second, I think this is a bad idea. Or wait a second, my constituents have told me this is not something they support. You do not have the authority, if it says ministerial, to do anything different. It's a quirk. Why they even have it run through you is a whole nother question.
It can. So you will see this issue, and what a lot of boards do is they'll read a statement about what their role is and who to go talk to if there's an issue before they announce it.
And as I was saying, we've routinely, tutored our board to ask that question of council, so that we can provide them with that cover. Why are we approving this, council? Remind me again, why are we approving the school district's budget, or that fire district's budget, whatever it may be? And we'll be happy to do that.
That reminds me, just a general kind of big point that's important. Realize that your attorney acts both as your sword, but also as your shield. In this type of case, use your county attorney's office as your shield. Have them explain why you can't do this. They can be aggressive, or they can take all the arrows for you, and it's your job as the client to figure out the best way to use your county attorney's office. But you need to use them in that respect. You should be asking them to take those arrows. It shouldn't be Steve Miller that's taking that. Steve should say, hey, Ken, hey, Chris, could you stand up and explain to the public, or we've actually been out in public. I know our former chairman, Mike Goodman, would actually come out in the public in these type of things. And Chris and I'd come out at 6:30 and just meet with the public and actually talk about it. So we could provide that shield, because people think you can do stuff you can't. And if you just say, hey, I can't, it looks like you're trying to weasel your way out of it. Instead, use your legal team to come talk with them and explain, hey, statutorily, you can't. Use us to protect you.
The only thing I would add to that is, give us a heads up first.
Yes.
Because sometimes we don't have the answers right at our fingertips. And it's really nice if we can go find some statutory or some case or something to go ahead and support. Why we're not just making this up, and it's bad business for the board to do that. No, there may be liability concerns, there may be federal laws out there, there may be environmental laws out there. Why can't I drill at 6 o'clock in the morning? That's when it's cooler out there. Well, there's a noise ordinance, there's dust control, there's other things. But yeah, just give us a heads up. Yes.
Can you discuss issues you have with the rubber stamp?
Yes. You have to absolutely, you can say, I don't personally agree. There's nothing wrong with you saying, this is my opinion. I think that this is garbage. I don't think that we should be doing this. However, my legal team has told me I have zero opportunity to do anything about it. But you can voice your objection, you can voice why you're concerned, but at the end of the day, you have to follow it. Yeah, but absolutely, there's no problem with that.
All right. Probably know this, sometimes people forget, new board members forget that you're the board, not just for the Board of Supervisors, but other specific county boards, such as a flood control district. If you have a jail district, you're the supervisors of that. The library district, public health, sanitary, and county improvement districts. So those are really separate political entities, but you as the Board of Supervisors take off one hat and put on the other hat. Now we're convening as as the board of the flood control or the library district, and so forth. And there are specific statutory authorities. And sometimes you have to be careful, because if the Board of Supervisors is wanting to do something in the library district, you may need to have the library district approve that contract, not the Board of Supervisors, because the library district is entering into that. Again, it's a separate entity. It's a separate legal entity under the statutes. Okay, and we talked about this, that the board has the power to determine budgets of all elected and appointed. Oh, we have a question, sorry.
On the separate districts, so are there specific statutes that talk about each potential district?
Yes, yeah.
So it's not a generalized
No.
how you operate.
It's unfortunately, you can't go to one and find it. It's not even in the 1100 series where the Board of Supervisors, Title 48, deals with special districts.
Okay.
And then there's another title for public health that has other districts, and so forth. But yeah, no, they're kind of out there.
It's statutorily created. It's just not easy to find.
Okay, let's see.
So this gets to, I believe it's Supervisor David's question. You'd asked specifically about, I believe it was you, if I'm wrong, I apologize, whether that kind of line item and that type of stuff. And then there was a question, I believe, from are you county manager, sir?
No, supervisor in, Pima County.
I'm sorry, I apologize,
That's
sir.
okay.
But you can't keep them from carrying out their legal obligations. So you cannot, let's say that you really, really dislike your recorder, like you cannot stand this person. So your suggestion is I'm gonna make their life miserable by allocating them $0. So they're going to quit, or they're going to fail, or they're gonna make, you don't have the ability to do that because now you're frustrating their ability to actually carry out their legal obligations. So your ability to say, hey, that's in excess of what's necessary, to a degree, yes, but you can't intentionally underfund them to make them unsuccessful. That was a walking into a lawsuit, and that would be highly problematic for everybody.
And at the end of the day, it wind up probably costing the county twice because, you know, you're gonna have to get representation for youth and representation for that
For the
other
other part,
elected
because your
official.
county attorney can't represent you on either of them.
Because there are clients too. That sheriff is also the county attorney's client that they come to us day in and day out for advice. Why can't they fund me an extra, 5 patrol cars? Well, you just had 3 last year, stop wrecking them. I joke, but it really comes down to, you could not say, I'm not gonna fund you any more patrol cars. If they, all of a sudden, they're down to 2 because they're in the shop or whatever, you probably have to do that because that's part of their mission to go ahead and provide public health, safety, whatever the welfare might be. So you cannot cut their budget so small that they cannot perform that essential function.
But what you could do though, is if they have something that is not an essential function, but they like doing it. Now, I love my sheriff, but I'm gonna use him as an example. Everybody called him Hollywood. He was on all kinds of different TV programs and those type of things. In theory, you could say, what is the allocation of county tax dollars that are being used for some of this promotion? All the junk that you have your name written on, all of those type of things. You could say, hey, that is not an essential function of the office, and we are not going to give you money for that. Now, that's a decision you'd have to make, a fight that you would enter into. So you can't say no bullets. You can't say no guns. You can't say no car. You can't say no people. You could say no crap with your name on it. No more TV, just as an example. I mean, the reality is it doesn't cost a lot to do some of this stuff, but you do have the ability to look at those individual things and say, that's beyond what you're doing. And you know what? We're in austerity measures. Financially, we're struggling. And I can't, as the sort of overseer and controller of the budget, justify to my constituents that I'm giving you $50,000 a year so you can have really cool t-shirts. Like, that's just not something that's okay. You have the authority to sort of line item that and just say, hey, we're not giving you funds for that.
And another area that comes up is when some of these other elected officials apply or get grants or get a specific allocation from the legislature. And it happens a lot, I shouldn't say a lot. It happens occasionally with the sheriff's office or border security or whatever it may be. They got a specific allocation directly from the legislature to the sheriff's department. It did not go through the board of supervisors to get approval of whether or not we want that. They got that, so they have the ability to go ahead and control those specific things. Sometimes those aren't given a whole lot of direction on how they're supposed to use those. There was one the last year, I can't think, it was the one that,
Probably the DEMA grant.
that's the one.
There was a Department of Emergency and Military Affairs where essentially about $10 million were given to county attorneys and county attorneys and sheriff's departments. And you could apply for it and get those funds. And essentially it was how they want to use them. As long as it was designed for public safety, I think there had to be a tie specifically to the border. But for example, we got money because we said, hey, we were prosecuting drugs that came through the southern border, and we had additional costs, and they were able to give us those funds to reimburse some of those costs. You wouldn't have the ability to come in and say, yeah, I want you to use that money over here. Instead of the drug money, I want you to use this in a different program. I want you to hire a new justice court attorney. You can't use those earmarked funds separately.
But we don't want to give you 50 grand for your t-shirts. We pull that back, then can they cost shift in their own budget and do it anyway?
Yeah, they can. The reality is, yeah, the 50 might be excessive because of procurement rules, but generally, yes,
Yeah.
they have the ability, if it's something that they truly prioritize, they can manipulate.
And we need those t-shirts because it builds camaraderie. It makes the public aware of who we are when we're out there. There's all kinds of justifications that can be used to try to give you guys cover, if you want, for why they're doing that. Because you will get some public pushback. Well, why do they have, I remember the one from, Maricopa years ago, again, Sheriff Arpaio, had his name on all the vehicles. Sheriff Arpaio, on all the patrol cars. Or didn't like that a whole lot. So yeah, eventually they got off of there.
Good question.
Yes.
So if you get grant money from the state for, say, 6 new deputy sheriffs, right? That money comes from that grant. How do you, when the grant money maybe does come through the next year and the next year after that, and everyone is saying, well, how can you not be for security because you're not going to fund these? What do you do then?
You want to address that one? I mean, I'm happy to add.
So that's not uncommon. So most grants are typically a 3-year cycle. And there's usually 1 year, if there's money, it renews for a second, it renews for a third. A lot of grants die at the 3rd year. What ends up happening is I, as the elected, let's say you gave me 3 attorneys, I have to come to you and I have to justify we should now be using county taxpayer dollars. And this is the reason why we should. And you unfortunately have to make the really difficult decision because it's you as a board sitting as a whole that has to decide, hey, is this something that we want to continue? And really it becomes a dialogue between you and myself or your team and mine. And we're usually publicly explaining why this is a benefit to the community. I can tell you our board makes us put everything in writing before. Like, what happens if we eliminate this? Why is this necessary? We go through our finance department reports provided to the board. That way the board is at least intelligent about it, but that discussion oftentimes has to take place publicly because the reality is there's not enough money for everything. The best example that I can give you is there's a DA that's in, it's where Texas A&M is in Texas. And he called a lot of pressure for not going capital. A death penalty case is very, very expensive. So when his board, who got pressure, asked him, why did you not go capital in this case? Which is inappropriate to happen. Please don't ever do that. But they did publicly. And he said, because I had to make a decision. If I went capital here, you all have to fund that. But that means there wasn't going to be a fire truck to the fire department. We were going to lose 3 different sheriff's deputies and all of the other intention. And ultimately the board was satisfied with it. But there has to be a relationship so you can have those conversations. And what Chris said earlier, I think is most important. Don't blindside us.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make you look good and it doesn't make us look good. It doesn't make your row officers look good. Oftentimes there's a decision and we can have that conversation beforehand. We should have it publicly, but so the public kind of understands what's going on. Because oftentimes there's information going on, but at the end of the day, if that grant runs out and you don't want to fund it, it ends up being you saying no. You get to be the big bad wolf.
And just a second, please. And in that, what you should also be doing is working with that elected and the HR staff. So when that individual is hired on a grant, they know this position is grant funded. Should the grant go away, your position may be eliminated. They know that right up front. So do they forget? Absolutely. Year number 3, they forgot they were on a grant. But that at least gives you the cover and it gives the ability right up front as one of the questions you could ask, is this grant funded position, is the people that are going to be placed in there aware that if the grant goes away, they may not have a position.
ARPA funds.
Yeah, I'm sorry, please.
No, so basic, I just want to make sure that I get this right. So somebody's got a grant, like the sheriff, so that's good news, right? You should, in one of the meetings, like you said, you can't do much about it because they received that grant, right? But you at least should have that conversation and questioning like what's gonna happen after that dies, right?
Absolutely.
Out in the public.
I would
Each
certainly.
grant, right?
Yes, and that's why I think you'd asked the question earlier, like, why do all these have to go before us? Some of the other things, why do we have to sign all contracts? For that very reason. Because if ultimately a grant or that money runs out and you stop providing that service, you're the one that catches the flack. It's not me. It's you that gets beat up for it. Derek?
Let me just tack on to that as well. Most grants, overwhelmingly, most grants require the board to sign off before the grant is received. So you've got that authority there as well. You may look at that at the upfront and say, we can't stand up a program for 3 years and then continue it thereafter. We're not going to accept a grant. Occasionally, there's legislative grants of money that sort of bypass, but those are rare. Overwhelmingly, the board's got to sign off on it like any other contract.
Derek, I remember in your county, when Jeremy was the county attorney, we had diversion money. And he did not take the diversion money, although it was allocated. I think it was like $75,000. And he essentially said, look, $25,000 a year isn't enough to pay our costs. And it's not realistic that this is going to continue after those 3 years. So ultimately, he did not accept it, even though the state had allocated funds. And I swooped in and happily took his $75,000.
And that conversation he had with the board as it was developing in real time.
And one of the other reasons that you have those conversations, a lot of these grants, and this is where your control has a match component. does the board need to match that? Does your office need to match that? Whether it's 25% or 30%, but there's usually a match component. And as a board of supervisor, you should be aware, where's that coming from? Are you expecting the general fund to do this, or do you have this in your budget already to do the match?
Absolutely.
Does,
Okay.
does all federal money that comes to a county, does it have to first make a stop at the state? And if so, does the state have leverage or opportunities to stop it from going down to the county?
Not all, but most.
Yeah.
There are certain federal funds like I apply for directly. Think like SAMHSA funds for mental health and those type of funds. The individual row officers can go out, try and obtain them and then bring it to the board for sort of approval afterwards. But most federal money actually goes through the state and then comes down.
Right.
What the state does with it, I have no control. That's what you guys pay Craig and his team the big bucks for, to make sure that those monies are coming down as unencumbered as possible towards you.
Big one, a few years ago, the COVID money. Yeah, it was allocated to the counties, but it came through the state.
So Pinal County, for example, we didn't get ours. It went to Ducey, and Ducey got to decide how he wanted to allocate it. Even though we were roughly the same size as the city of Mesa, we fell just under that 500,000 population. So per dollar, by statute, but per dollar, we got less than half of what the federal government had earmarked for us. Because our governor at that time decided there was a better use of the money. I don't remember what he used it for, but he essentially said, yeah, it's coming to us. We get to spend it otherwise. So we actually only got half of what the federal government earmarked us. So our population got $50 for every Pima County resident or Maricopa County resident or city of Mesa or anybody over 500,000.
So let's see, actual and necessary expenses. We talked about this a little bit, where you can't cut someone's budget so much that they cannot do what they're essentially statutorily required to do. You have to fund, so there's necessary expenses, and that to some extent is left to that individual department, what's necessary, but also the board of supervisors really has that budgetary authority over them to say, tell me why this is necessary. Explain to me how we're going to do this, and boards of supervisors really, at times, want to poke that other elected and say, we're not going to fund that. We're going to go to the court, and we're going to tell the court's going to support us in that. Courts are really reluctant to get into those inter-elected disputes under a board of supervisors, and that's the quote right there. The court does not want to be a super board of supervisors, and they're not going to necessarily substitute their judgment for the county board. With this case, one of the things that had to do with, back in the 90s, when there was a fiscal downturn and everyone was pinching pennies and looking under the sofa for whatever they could find, some more dollars. The county had implemented a policy. If you want to add positions, you got to fill out this form. You got to justify this. You got to explain where the money's coming from, how it's going to do. And then, we want to go do a survey to make sure that you actually need this. We're going to have our budget analysts go and look and determine whether this is an actual necessary expense. And,
that case is the Dan case. So Judge Dan said, screw your things. I'm a judge. I don't care what your stupid policies are. I need it. I said I need it.
I need 2 JAs and a court report.
Give me the position. And actually the court came back and said, no. That's a reasonable restriction that they're putting on. If they're doing that, the board of supervisors is tasked with the budget. And if they have reasonable restrictions or reasonable thresholds, we're not going to come in and we're not going to sort of say, we're going to override you. So as long as your position is reasonable, as long as you can defend it and say, this is why we're doing this. And there's a lot, not just, I don't like that person, or I think that person's a jerk, or, I think this is a waste. If you can reasonably justify it, the courts are not going to come in and they're not going to essentially boot you to the side and stand in your shoes and make decisions.
How about AOs?
AOs are a different animal.
Administrative orders.
Yeah, AOs are administrative orders from the courts. You have no authority over those whatsoever. So the court gets to make kind of their own rules. And because the administration of courts,
separate branch of government,
is the one that makes all the decisions, they end up finding them always to be constitutional. And they are able to do all kinds of stuff. So there's literally, just as a real quick aside, there's literally an AO or a rule called 123, and I'm not making it up. But rule 123 says that you all are not entitled to know any of their HR issues.
Yes.
They get to keep all of that internally. So what will happen, unfortunately, is you're going to have an employee that works for the court. They are going to be mistreated, whether it's sexual harassment or hostile work environment, or the person is just terrible. They're going to come to you and they're going to say, hey, I am your employee. You guys are paying my salary. Help me. This is unbelievable. The courts will do their own separate investigation. They will take their own separate positions, and they will not tell you a daggone word about what happens. You're not entitled to know, even that an investigation occurs, the results of the investigation, or anything else. So what you have is you have an employee that's left that is frustrated with you, that went to your county HR department, and they were left without any sort of recourse. That's the power of the AO. That's the power of the second or the third branch of government.
And to that extent, the county attorney doesn't represent or advise the courts. That's the attorney general's office.
Correct.
That's that.
Is that information all public record?
No, not in the courts. It is all sealed.
Yep.
Yep. It's lovely.
What about the JP? Are they separate?
So the JP, the Justice of the Peace fit in this really weird sort of category because we represent them.
Sort of.
Sort of.
Reluctantly.
When they get in trouble, we have to pay for their counsel to represent them against the Judicial Commission. If they have legal questions, depending on what those legal questions are, sometimes we have to answer those. Sometimes they go to the AG. Your Justice of the Peace sit in this no man's land. They're in a really kind of weird area. The same way with their individual employees, so the clerks of the courts and those type of things. Oftentimes they can kind of make the election. And that's the same thing with your clerk of the board, or excuse me, your clerk of courts. Your clerk of courts actually gets to decide, do they want to be part of county HR or do they want to be part of the court's HR? And that actually just within the last maybe 8 years came out 6 years ago. It was Michael Jeans in Maricopa County who said, I don't want to be a part of the court's HR system anymore. I think they're hogwash. My word's not his, but I would rather have the county do it. And he actually litigated, sued, and ultimately they said, you get your choice. If you want to go and you want to be part of the county, that's fine. But the county does not get to come in and say, we want them. It's that elected's ability to say, hey, which HR department's going to better serve my people?
So Ken, what did the courts say? The statute makes them special, where they get to pick and choose.
We're the court. I mean, that's just how the court rules. I mean, there's not a statutory provision that I'm aware of that hung their hat on.
Yeah.
They just said, hey, we're a different branch of government. The executive branch should not be in control of us. We're separate, distinct, and we need to be separate, distinct. We need to have our own power. If we allow them to make those decisions, suddenly, we're sort of beholden to them in this weird way. We shouldn't be beholden to them. We have to have our separate own branch that's strong and we can stand upon.
I just wanted to point this case out, this had to do with the sheriff. And it also had to do with the sheriff wanting to, spend money as he felt he could. And, sorry to throw you under the bus, Eric, but we got a great decision out of this case that said, and I love the soundbite that the court said, it's difficult to imagine how legal requirements could be met if elected county officials independently made their own budget to control their own spending. Comes back to you have to control the budget. You have to know how much money you have coming in. You have to be able to allocate that. If a separate elected official were able to control his specific budget to spend and do whatever he wants, then you basically have the ability to exceed your budget. And statutorily, you don't want to do that, and you can't do that. And that's a very important case that's just somewhat recent.
That gets back to our friend from Pima County. You'd asked earlier about the question. You said, hey, can they really exceed it? In certain areas they can, but they can't just ignore it.
Yeah.
They can't just say, hey, I don't care. I'm the biggest dog in town. I'm the most important. The recorder's really not important. So I'm going to take, the $2 million of their budget. I'm going to bring it in there. They don't have that unfettered discretion to spend willy-nilly. There are controls. Now there are, again, limited abilities for them to exceed, but generally speaking, they need to stay within.
Because there's reporting requirements. A lot of things have to be reported back to the state. And you need your budget and finance department to be able to do that, usually, how that works. Now we're going to switch a little bit. the county attorney's role, our kind of role to help you all.
So the legal advisor, I mean, that's literally, you can ask the question. Legally, what am I required to do? What happens in this particular circumstance? And you can request a formal opinion. The one thing I will tell you though, and it's to be aware of, if you ask a formal opinion, it's not just for you, it's for either the 3 or the 5 of you. So for example, you can't say, I really can't stand my district supervisor in District 3. I'm asking for an opinion that I can use to embarrass my District 3 supervisor. Well, District 3 supervisor is going to get that very opinion. They're going to find out that you requested the opinion and they're going to get the very same opinion. We actually had a secret opinion from Ethics Council on this very issue, just to be sure, because we had Board of Supervisors saying, hey, I want to know this. I don't think the other ones need to know it because it's specific to me. So send it just to me, not to them.
Or it's specific just to my district.
Correct. Yes, just to the
Yeah,
district.
it doesn't play that way.
So
We're not your individual advisors. We're advisors to the board as a whole, as a collective. Yeah, and we have to tell a lot of supervisors that, over the years, basically, I'm not your I'm not your individual attorney. I'm an attorney for the board.
we're actually prohibited. So if you say, hey, I'm going through a child care matter, can you just sort of direct me a little bit? We're actually prohibited from doing that. We're falling outside the bounds of our authority, and we actually would take on liability, and we're actually violating the statute that says I can't practice private law while the county attorney. So sometimes we say, hey, that falls sort of outside of the scope. We're limited. And that legal advisor though, that's a generic term. Remember, there's also, you can ask us, like, what are the implications? What are the unintended consequences? That is part of our duty advising you, is looking down and trying to the best of our ability sort of prognosticate moving forward. If we do this, realize this is what's going to happen. There's going to be this escalation. That's part of advising, so you all can make a decision. At the end of the day, you're the decision makers. I'm not. I can give you all the advice in the world. I can tell you behind closed doors, I think you're a stinking idiot. But when we go back in public, I can't tell the public that I disagreed with you. I can't tell the public that I think you're a moron. I represent you, and as long as I'm giving you the information and you make a decision, the county's stuck with it and we're stuck with that decision. So use us. Ask us those questions.
And I think the important point to look at is also this last section down here. That is, to some extent, your get out of jail free card. It really is, if you are acting on the written opinion of a county attorney, you have a defense,
And if the converse is true though.
Yes.
If I tell you X and you do Y and you are wrong, you are not protected. That's the reality. And I'm going to use something that may strike close to home, but I think we need to talk about it. Was Cochise County. And we had the board down there who did not agree with the advice that was given by Brian McIntyre. Brian told them X, they did Y, they're now being prosecuted for it. Had Brian told them Y and they did Y, they could not get in trouble for that. And again, I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but if you do, whether we're right or wrong is irrelevant to you as far as being protected. But if we tell you X and we're right and you're wrong and you don't follow our advice, you potentially could get yourself in trouble. That's the only time you lose a sort of Pascal's wager.
And then you could go and testify against that board.
And violate attorney-client privilege, provide detailed, executive session minutes and stuff to the attorney general and, basically.
It is a highly complex issue that I can tell you that is actually, there's been clarification that became effective January 1st. There's actually new ethical rules that were adopted in part because of that, in part because of AG Brnovich and AG Mays, because they were taking cases that were adverse to their clients. So there's actually new ethical rules that took effect literally January 1st.
Which are?
You guys are the client. There used to be a belief that I, as a separately elected, sort of could stand on my separately elected status and I could argue what I think is right, even if it's not the same as what my clients think. Now, the civil team could not do so. So Bob couldn't stand up and say they're wrong, but I, as the elected, could say, look, I'm the elected county attorney. I represent in my county all 500,000 people, and I have an obligation to represent them in their best interest, not just represent the board, because while I'm their attorney, I have this separate duty. The Supreme Court said you do not have that separate duty. And that's really what Brian relied on. Quite frankly, Brian said, look, I represent the county as a whole. I have to represent the entirety of the people. And at that time, there was at least a tacit belief that could happen. The Supreme Court's come and said, no, that is not the case anymore. You represent your client. You cannot violate your client's confidences. you must represent your
The
client.
Bar Association ruled and is explained against him, saying he did violate attorney-client privilege and he did provide information that was
But he got-
an executive session.
But he got a finger wagging, and that's
Yeah, I
what,
think the guy's still a practicing attorney. If I had my druthers, the guy would be on a cross nailed in front of the county building, because that's a key tenet of being an attorney.
because of that dual argument, that's what the state bar actually recognized is, hey, he was saying he stood on this, and that's a reasonable position for him to take. So that's why it was actually led by not Chief Justice, but Justice Bill Montgomery, who actually led it and changed it. So I mean, we can talk about it offline, because
Oh, we'll talk about it offline.
but there was an actual change in the rules of attorneys, and we now have way less authority. as the elected.
Everybody in this room at risk for being basically politically attacked by an opposing attorney, political party attorney general. Okay, if you have a political disagreement or you create any situation, they can then use that to beat you over the head. That's the problem. And anything in executive session and anything attorney-client privilege wise that I discussed with my county attorney should not leave that room. But it was used in basically a grand jury hearing where that guy was, the county attorney was a witness against the board. And that's insanity. And why the county association and the insurance that we pay in the six-figure amount every, is a yearly, right? Yeah. Yearly, right? Didn't come to the defense of that board of supervisors is another thing we're gonna talk about offline.
One thing.
Doesn't the county attorney also get direction from the attorney general in cases like this?
No. So
Mace didn't
remember-
say if it's an election issue, you gotta go directly to her.
She can say that all she wants. So I want to go back. Remember when I showed you that provision that said you supervise all the electeds? There's actually a provision that says the AG supervises the county attorneys. I will tell you, each and every county attorney take umbrage with that. We believe it's in that same vein, like if you screw up, they can step in. So if you all remember, I hate to use all these terrible examples, but Alistair Adele had some issues. At that time, Attorney General Brnovich came in and said, I want to report what happened, why did it happen, and what are you doing to make sure it never happens again? All the county attorneys were sort of like, I guess that's sort of under that supervision because they didn't come in and actually take the office. Now, those of you in Apache County, they came in and she actually took the seat from Michael Whiting. I can tell you a lot of county attorneys are very, very uncomfortable with that. And so it's much along that supervision. I think there's going to be litigation that ultimately is going to come if she continues to do this. So for example, she came in and said, I have the ability to dismiss cases if I don't think you should prosecute them. I have the ability to take any kind of case, so abortion related cases. She said, I'm just going to claim those. What I can tell you is she said publicly she was going to do it. She's not done it. And I believe there'll be litigation if she tries. Much like you guys have been litigating for decades over this ability. We've not had that fight, but we soon will.
And this issue, to some extent, was discussed last week at the county managers meeting. On the new ethical rule that came out that's going to apply. And the one that really keys in is that, it requires a government lawyer. This is not county attorneys, city attorneys, everybody, a government lawyer to proactively make clear to the client who the government attorney represents and specify that scope of representation. How is that going to be played out? We're still figuring it out. Is that going to be in writing to say, I am your attorney and here are the guardrails of what my representation is? But the ER says you need to start doing that now. That just took effect in January. Again, the dust hasn't settled. We're only 15 days in.
No offense to you guys in your profession, but at any one given time in a courtroom, you have three lawyers in there, a judge and two, one plaintiff's attorney, and defendant. One of those guys is always wrong, right? So 1/3 of the time you guys are wrong, or maybe sometimes even more than that if the judge gets overturned on appeal. Then you have two attorneys in that room. So attorneys are not infallible. They give opinions. That opinion can be right or wrong.
Correct.
And if I disagree with the opinion of my county attorney because I think it's biased and politically motivated, that limits me in my ability to go in a certain direction because he gets to throw that magic card. Well, I provided advice to my county supervisor and he just disagreed with it. Well, yeah, because I think you're wrong. Because I know 1/3 to 2/3 of the time you might be. So what? I don't see how I get pigeonholed by a decision of a guy or gal that I may disagree with.
And ultimately make us all just rubber stamps.
Yeah, again, that's it. And it goes down to control. And we're an autonomous branch, right? 3 branches of government. Right? So that's the other irritating side of it. Again, we'll talk about that offline.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's coming right back to that statute right there. It says the county attorney is a legal advisor to the board of supervisors. Sometimes over the years, they've tried to divest that. So that the civil branch would have someone totally different that wasn't beholden to the county attorney, but was appointed by the board of supervisors. That's been tried one or two times and
That's how most states actually do it.
over the years.
They should have their own attorney.
But it hasn't been.
I know, because this is a guy or gal that goes into the courts and they have a relationship with the judges. Okay, this is the other funny thing that goes on. You have the county attorney, and they all, one of mine is married to a judge.
Brother-in-law.
Okay, my county attorney is married to a superior court judge. So you have these relationships that go on. And again, is she gonna provide me advice? There's a huge conflict there, right? And then I get yelled at if I want to go hire my own county or my own attorney. Because again, oh, you can't do that. Title 11 says you got to use the county attorney. You know, well,
So what I can tell you, the frustration that you're voicing, I can tell you as county attorneys, on the other side, I agree with it as well. Because if I'm actually doing my job and I tell you that I think you're an idiot in private and you go do it, I get blamed for your bad decisions. So I'm only saying it goes both
Yeah, I got
ways. And the way that we do this is unique. There's 3 that I'm aware of in the entire United States. It is Minnesota, Nebraska, and Arizona. We're the only 3 that have the county attorneys that are both the prosecutor and the civil advisor, and they're elected. So it is unique. I'm not advocating for anything. I'm just letting you know that it is very unique. And I think the new ethical rule that he decided complicates things even further. Right. So it is something that unsolicited advice from Kent, keep your eye on it.
Yeah.
I would predict in the next 15 years, the county attorney role probably won't be as it is today.
So if you don't have trust in your county attorney to advise you because he's got a political brand going this way, then it's okay to hire your own.
There is a specific process
There's a
that you have
process
to
you have to
go
go
through.
through to get there.
Harmony.
Have harmony with this.
That's the disharmony situation.
Yes, there is an entire process, and I don't feel comfortable telling you about it right now. But let me say this, though, there is a correct answer.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to throw Craig under the bus, but that's probably something that some of you may want to have a conversation about. There is some information that we can potentially provide to Craig, some ethical opinions we have specifically on that issue. But that's a supervisor issue. That's not an issue that like Chris and I should certainly be involved in. I'm sure Bob doesn't want anything to do with this conversation. Oh, sorry, Rich.
what if the 2 of you have different opinions? Do I follow yours? Do I follow his? Because you said he.
So with all due respect, he has to listen to me.
Yeah.
Even if he knows I'm wrong,
Yeah.
my name's at the top. So
Exactly.
his authority actually flows through me. So it's a delegation of authority through me.
So I'm still protected.
Right.
Yes, you were still protected.
Because.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's silly because the reality is, if I'm being frank and candid, he knows more than I do. If we disagree on an issue and an actual legal issue, he's right more times than I am. But because I won the popularity contest, I'm the one that matters. It's sort of from a 30,000 foot view, it's kind of interesting. The actual subject matter expert, his opinion is not as nearly as important as the actual elected person. Sorry, Craig, I know we're off the rails, my friend.
That's okay.
It's that hot button there. Yeah. Now talking about employing outside counsel. Yeah.
The next one is the one that has all
I think that's
the
the
harmony.
disharmony. Yep. Okay, the board does not have the authority to hire private legal counsel to advise it. That's under that case. Except necessary, you can hire, get outside counsel to try cases. You have the ability, because you, as a board of supervisors, has the ability to control your litigation. Yep. So you can say, I don't want to settle this case. I think we should settle this case, and the county attorney can say, I think it's a bad idea. But at the end of the day, you get to decide whether that case should settle or not settle. It's the board's authority on those type of things.
Or to sue or not sue. So you could say, I want to sue. I could say, I don't think we should sue. You can say, I don't care what you think. You are my attorney. I'm directing you to sue. And if the whole board as a whole gives that directive, we don't have a choice.
Unless there's an ethical conflict or something like that, then we might get somebody else to do it.
Kind of in that vein, say I have a civil attorney's office that's just inundated, but the board wants to push some property abatements and they just don't have time to do it. what is the process for the board to hire outside counsel to take care of those abatements?
Quite frankly, the easiest is just go to your county attorney and say, look, we want to do this. Will you please hire outside counsel? So I can hire outside counsel very easily, very quickly, very efficiently. I can say, look, this is in excess of what I'm able to do, or that's a specific thing. Nobody on my team has that ability. So I can just go get outside counsel. So if your attorney is willing to do it, the easiest is just go through the county attorney. Like we have a list of a roster of people that are already approved. We have relationships with actually Cynthia and this group up here of sort of pre-vetted attorneys who know what they're doing, and we'll go actually hire them. So if you can go through the county attorney, much easier. If you can't, then there is a process. You can call this claim disharmony. You can go to your insurance company, say why it's necessary. There's an entire process separate, but the easiest way is to go through your county attorney. And I would be shocked if your county attorney wouldn't agree.
And to the extent, why do you want to go to your county attorney to do that? Because they should at least have the insight, well, I don't want to give you a tax attorney for some other issue that they don't even practice. And just because, you heard this guy does good work.
There is a procurement process, so you can't hire your uncle to do all the work and give them money, or your nephew or brother. So there's an entire procurement process as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier that if the board says, you know what, I don't care, I want you to sue them. Is it a majority or is it gotta be unanimous?
No.
Just simple majority.
That's
Okay,
it. Yep.
all right, thanks.
Now, I would caution you to have that conversation with the board of with your county attorney,
Right,
because what you may not want to do is voice your objection and disgruntlement at that open meeting when they vote to approve that suit. Why? You just become a witness prior to the other side.
For the other side, and they'll put you on the stand and say, isn't it true that you said this? Isn't it true you felt this way?
but if I just said no,
Yep, absolutely
Perfectly
fine.
fine.
You-
less is more, I'm just a yes and no, black and white,
Yep.
we're not going there.
But may I explain my vote and then explain why you think it's a no? That's where
That's where you can get in some trouble.
our heart falls.
I just don't think the county has the authority to do this, and I'm really, upset that we're trying to go down this path and sue this, oust this poor lady from her home.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't do all that.
Yeah, but that's,
When I
And
get
that's where
home
you-
with my husband, maybe,
yeah.
but no, I'm just gonna say no.
But you should have that conversation in exec session.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
You should
yeah.
say, hey, I need legal advice. You can request legal advice and talk about the necessary implications, and you can't count votes. You can't say, hey, I'm going to vote this way, but you can
No.
talk about, look, this is what I'm concerned about. Are you concerned about that? So your board has the ability to hear it
Yeah.
privately, not publicly.
Because a lot of times,
And that's fine, yeah.
the rest of the board probably needs to hear that angst, that concern, of why this is a different perspective from you versus the rest of the board. It may sway other board members too,
Okay, thank you.
and that's done in executive sessions.
Yeah,
But you have to have a motion that passes to go into executive session.
Sure.
So you may not make it there.
That's true.
I would encourage, if you ever have doubt, go into exec session. Because you can go into exec session and you can say, hey, everything that was said here, that should be out in the public. Let's go have this conversation in the public. You could always do that, but you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube if you have it publicly and it should have been held privately first. So if there's a doubt, go into exec session. There's no harm going into exec session because you could always come out and have that conversation.
but I'm sorry, but if in the exec session, they don't want to do that, then would that be another majority thing? So if they don't want to do it, we can't go out and do it.
Correct.
Right.
Okay,
It's depending on the makeup of your board. Sometimes, like Pinal County, for example, we vest all that authority in our chair. So our
okay,
chair gets to
Oh, I
decide if there's going to be conversation.
okay,
And don't take offense if your county attorney kind of, I don't want to say preempts, but prods you. Excuse me, Mr. Chair, this may be a topic that's more appropriate to discuss in executive session that we can provide legal advice on. That should tell you, like, ooh, we may be getting in an area that we need to get an explanation for first. Don't take it offense that, that county attorney recommends you go into executive session. You don't ever have to, but I think, a good county attorney would kind of try to direct you that way. Basically, to provide you a better defense, to make sure that you understand the legal parameters of our downside, upside risk of what you're gonna do. I think there was someone else I thought had a question or a hand up. Okay, moving on. Okay, now.
So here's your lack of harmony. So that was the kind of question. So if the county attorney doesn't agree, or you don't think they can meet it, or you just think that they're whether because of political perspective or personal issues, you can request that a lack of harmony be found. Now, this is disfavored, and the courts don't like to find it, and it creates a nightmare. This is, in your mind, this is the nuclear option. That's how you should consider this. If you as a board declare and vote and say this is disharmony, you have essentially, in my opinion, irretrievably fractured that relationship with the county attorney, and it is going to be difficult sailing the rest of your term, that person's term, as long as they're around. But it does exist in case it's necessary. Yeah.
And who determines that there's a lack of harmony? The board.
The board, not me.
County attorney. The
I can
board
hate
determines.
you. I can hate you to your core. I still have to represent you to the best of my ability. Even if I think every one of you is just dead wrong, I don't have the ability to say, I can't do this anymore. My only out is to retire, is to turn in my resignation.
Does the county attorney have recourse to challenge that by going to the courts and say, hey, these guys just are carte blanche, finding disharmony on everything to push me out of the way, or?
I think it'd be difficult to start that. I think you may get there if awesome, everything is disharmony. Certain things should be black and white that you're not gonna disagree on.
Right.
You'd hope. But if you're gonna take exception with every decision, everything you may be being challenged at some point in time. I could see a county attorney doing that. And where in that spectrum does it come? The first 3, 4, 5? Hard to say. Depends on those issues are.
So what we saw this out of the Andy Thomas kind of era that was in Maricopa County. So it ended up having, you had Romney, and then you had essentially Bill Montgomery come forward and say, look, the board's had its own counsel. That's not appropriate. We don't have this issue. They can't just keep saying there's disharmony. They have their own separate standalone counsel forever. And the court said, yeah, you're right. Find a way to bring it back together. And that's what happened, I don't know, probably 15 years ago,
Yeah.
give or take.
Probably more closer to 20 now.
Was it now?
Yeah. I still have the scars to prove it. Okay, you want to talk about what executive sessions can be used for? I know you're going to hit on this a little bit more. I think it's in the afternoon, which open meeting on executives. We just wanted to touch on it. There's a certain list of things that should be pointed out when you go into executive session. You just can't say, I want to go into executive session, discuss this matter. You want to go there for legal advice? Always appropriate to get legal advice. If we're talking about contracts, talk about specific litigation. A new one that got added a little while ago was security plans and assessments. You know,
Generally, everything's public.
Yeah.
We want to be open and transparent, except what our evacuation routes are in an emergency, or what our our continued operation plans are, so we can make sure that the government can continue to exist. That is able to be held away from the public, so people can't use that to thwart our plans to address emergencies. So that's a an executive session thing. Just hey, I want to chat about this, and I just want to be able to be really open and candid and free. Executive session's not for that. Now, if you want to have that conversation with your county attorney, you could ask that you meet with them, not from the dais, and you can meet with them individually and you can have that conversation. But it's not just an opportunity to chat and voice and complain and say, again, that assessor's a moron or whatever you want to say. Like, that's not, exec session is limited because there's a presumption that everything you do, it should be public. Everything you do should be checked by the public. They should have the opportunity to know what's going on and to be able to voice their opinion. That's the way that our government works. So if you want to have conversations and communications where the public is excluded, it needs to be narrowly tailored to this set of circumstances. Now, but we can torture this a little bit.
Yeah, and so, but other than the ombudsman, who would actually say you're going into executive session too frequently? And because those records are not.
The public will do it. Well, not the ombudsman, the Auditor General has the ability to look at your executive session records. The Auditor General has that ability.
So your clerk of the board, they have to take notes. They still have to say, this is the topics that were discussed. The Auditor General has the ability to come in and actually look at those notes taken and saying, look, you guys are going to the exec session for things that you should not be in exec session for. And if that happens, that's actually an open meetings violation. Yeah. And I'm sure you're gonna have a conversation about that later as well.
But they're the ones who would pull you back. And there's no local.
No
local authority that.
Yeah, there's no watchdog. I mean, it's the county attorney. If you guys are going into things, we should say, hey, we're getting really far afield, like we're getting really close to open meeting violation, or this isn't an appropriate exec session. And frankly, you guys will police yourself. I mean, we've had it where I've had supervisors say, I don't think this is an exec session discussion.
Right.
I think we need to take it out.
And a lot of times you may be in an executive session talking about X, and it kind of starts to morph to Y. And that's where your county attorney says, excuse me, Supervisor, the topic we're here is on X. You're now starting to talk about Y. It may be related, but I don't see the connection. Can you make that connection for me? Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. I try to give them a little bit of rope, like, how are you gonna tie this all together? And sometimes it works.
Okay, so you said that if you go to an executive session, you can always go back to the public, right?
Correct.
So wouldn't it be a good practice that if you go to an executive session, eventually you make that public when the time is right?
So no, because if you invade executive session, they could invade all executive session. So suddenly our security plans and assessments could get, so you don't want to breach that bubble. So it's not like, hey, this is, if you come out and have that conversation in public, you don't say, in executive session, we said X, Y, and Z. Instead, you just have that conversation. So you're not referencing what actually happened in exec. You don't say, well, Steve Miller said this, and Rich said this, and well, I said this. Like that stays secure. You just have the conversation publicly, because we need to keep the sanctity of that. I mean, look, it's personnel matters, it's HR issues, it's information that can't be provided, it's legal advice, it's legal strategy, it's how we're going to defend. We do not want to pierce that veil.
It becomes public when we vote on the contract. Right. Yeah, I mean, eventually that
The decision
information does finally show up someplace.
And my best answer to your question, Lee, is it's gonna depend on which one of these items you went into executive session for. If you're purchasing property, you may not want to come out and say, yeah, we're gonna purchase this, you haven't done the deal yet. Because now your price probably just went up. Because somebody else, or if you're gonna have litigation, and you directed your attorneys, hold the line on this. I don't want to bend. I want to make sure that we get every nickel we can on this contract dispute. Again, you don't want to come out and say, that's the advice we get, the advice was, we're going forward with this litigation. But it depends which one of these things you're in executive session on. Legal advice is probably the more general one that you can come out sometimes and say, could you explain, the legal advice that's been given to the board and why the board shouldn't do this, or it should do this.
So settlement discussions is another one. You may authorize me as your attorney to say, hey, I'm going to authorize you to settle this for up to $50,000. Well, I don't want to tell everybody that I have up to $50,000 to settle, because if I can settle it for 25, we save the taxpayer $25,000. So we never want that information to be able to come out, because then they already know what the bottom dollar is. So that's the reason. And if you start just saying, well, this is what happens in executive session, they can say that in executive session, there is no privilege, and all of that becomes public. And that's the worst case scenario.
I think we're getting close to the end now. This is something that I put together over my years of, when new board members come in, it is just some common misconceptions that a new board member tends to have, I can hire whomever I want. To some extent, yeah.
There's anti-nepotism law, though. It's actually a crime to hire within a certain level of consanguinity within your blood relationship.
I can fire, I can reorganize, I can discipline however I want and whoever I want. There's HR rules, there's harassment, there's federal regulations, so you gotta be really careful when you start doing that. I mean, I've seen it happen, something as innocuous as, geez, the woman that we've hired is in her 50s, and I'm gonna let you go because I really think we need some new blood in here. Ooh, you may just have stepped in something. New blood could mean younger.
That's what they say. We get sued and we give usually their salary or two to them for that comment.
So you just gotta be aware of what you say and what you do. I can purchase whatever I want if I don't exceed my budget. Again, there's procurement rules that you need to be aware of. I can execute contracts with whomever I want. Again, only the board as a whole can execute.
The majority. It's the majority rule there.
Yeah. Oh, and this one I always love, if I copy the county attorney on my email, it's privileged. Not always. Most times it's not, depending on what you're asking for or what we're communicating about. It doesn't necessarily mean that email communication won't come out if there's a public records request. And if I use my private phone or computer on county matters, I don't have to disclose that. No, they can get to your county phone. They can get to your private phone if you're doing county business on it. They just have to ask the right questions. They get you there. I mean, they can get there. And if you're if they can show that you're doing work, at home on your personal computer on county business, they can probably get that. And there are some cases out there dealing with, phones and the like, certain things, but one that came to mind is like a DPS officer. Out of a scene, he's using a private phone because he can only get, coverage on that one better than the government issued one. The attorneys on the other side on this accident case, they wanted that. What time did you get there? What did you do? They wanted all that information and it's private, it's my private phone. Didn't matter. You were doing government business on that private phone. It's public now, or that
That
context.
portion, yeah, that context, not everything. So not the communications with your wife or your husband, but any of that government so you can't just talk behind and say, hey, text with your fellow supervisor and say, this is what I really think. This is how I'm going to vote. Using your private phone is not an end around the public records law.
This is just a shopping list, if you will, of, the prohibitions to be aware of. I don't think we need to go into each one of them, under them, because we're running out of time. Craig's like, wrap it up.
So just real quick, the gratuity reward, it's de minimis, which means very little value. If you do something for a group and they give you a $25 gift card to go to Panera Bread or something, that's okay. If they give you like $1,000, you're gonna get in trouble. Just be aware of it. And if you have any question, ask your county attorney. The standard is de minimis, which just means small, and that's when you get into that maybe range where you kind of have to look at it in context.
But $1,000 worth of small $25 gift
That's a
cards,
problem.
that's a problem too.
That's a problem.
Yes, absolutely, certainly.
Yes, size matters. That, yeah. Recommendations for success. These are some things that I think you should just kind of take away and, try to follow up on. All counties should have their own county policies and procedures. Get familiar with them, find them, read them, take a look at them. If you got questions, ask. If you don't have, board meeting policies, you may want to adopt some. It helps, avoid some of the, well, wait a second, Robert's rule says this. Well, the board's never adopted Robert's rules. What are the rules? What kind of motions can be made? I want to reconsider this item. Is that 2 meetings later? That you want to reconsider something? That could be a problem. Contract's already been entered. Dollars have already been spent. So having policies on how you develop and how you handle those things up front really helps avoid once you stepping in something. Your records retention, again, you're going to talk about some of that in the public records this afternoon. Discrimination and codes of conduct, gift policies we talked about.
So I'll say this one's garbage. As a new lobbyist, don't ever be afraid of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you guys don't bear gifts anyway.
Yeah.
I have the gift of information.
And then lastly, when in doubt, recuse or disclose to prevent a conflict. If you think that you may have a conflict, you need to disclose that. A lot of times perception, remember, perception is reality. Whether you actually do or not, the public may think you sure as heck do have, but if you disclose what it is or why I don't think it is, you can get better cover that way. So be aware of being disclosing. It should be in writing too. Should be in writing so that your clerk of the board has that. So in case later someone questions, why did he vote on this? Well, here was, he had declared a conflict, and that's why he did not vote on that.
In that, it doesn't need to be incredibly detailed. It doesn't like, I have had, intimate relationship with this person. I have personal conflict. I mean, it's just, there needs to be a record of it, but don't spill your tea. There's no reason to get into the nitty gritty details.
And I think that was the last one. Yep.
Craig's hoping that's our last.
Craig.
No, this was fantastic.
Oh,
Do we have time
All
for
right.
one question?
You're free.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just had a quick question. Our county's taking the baby steps on looking at zero-based budgeting. The question I have is, may we compel the court system or the other elected officials to use that system if we direct them to?
Maybe.
I think you have a harder time with the court.
I was gonna say, that's my concern. Courts probably not. The other electeds probably so.
Okay.
And again, what granular level of detail are you gonna want or have to administer?
Rely on your county attorney, but I'll give you an example of what you could do. We're not going to approve $1 of additional budget from last year unless we get a zero-based budget. So there's those sort of ways saying, hey, we're setting this groundwork unless you comply with this. I'm not telling you necessarily have to do that, but there's different ways that you can get there. And that's how you can sort of really compel them because as costs increase, if you don't even give me cost of living adjustments, I've got to come up with that money. So I may have to eliminate an employee to get there. It's easier for me to comply. Like that's the way that we get there.